Hi everyone, Ed from Horolograph here. It's probably been close to a decade since I've posted any watch reviews, but since I've been stuck in my hotel room in Tokyo on a business trip, and I just bought a new watch, I thought it's a good time to share it with everyone. As far as I know, there are no individual owner reviews of this particular model of this particular watch, but there is plenty of resources about the stainless steel version, which is more or less identical. And for that reason, I won't get into a lot of the very technical details, but I think it's worth just going over the very basics. So this is the 1959 re-edition of the Breitling Navitimer. Now, it is basically a one-for-one reproduction of the watch from 1959, at least the stainless steel version is. I'm not aware whether or not a solid rose gold version existed. In a very cursory search, I saw versions that were plated in gold with a stainless steel case back, but nonetheless, I think it's a very good looking watch and quite a wearable size at 41 millimeters, which is the reason I bought it. So just a few on the dimensions here. It's 41 millimeters in diameter, 12.9 millimeters thick, which is pretty close to what a Rolex Daytona is, 48.7 millimeters from lug to lug. And just for comparison, the thickness is 12.9, whereas the automatic version of the Navitimer in 41 millimeter is 0.7 millimeters thicker at 13.6 millimeters. Now you might say 0.7 doesn't make a huge difference, and I would argue you're probably correct, but I am glad that Breitling had developed this B09 movement, which is based on the B01 automatic chronograph movement that they use for pretty much everything, specifically for this model. Now, they have gone on to use that movement or this particular movement in other watches, but I think it's good that they stayed faithful to the original model with plexiglass crystal, solid case, but now the improvement is the water resistance is 30 meters, and a snap-on case back, as would be for the original. It also comes with a tang buckle, which is really my preference. I know the deployants are a little bit more fancy, but for me, the tang buckles are much more comfortable. The strap is a calf leather strap, which is a bit unusual for a watch that retails for over $20,000, but it's not an alligator strap. But for this particular vintage style, I actually don't mind. The only thing is that it is, as you can see here, a very thick and quite stiff strap. And speaking of very stiff, another thing I noticed compared to the other chronographs that I own, and I own quite a few very representative models, is that the pusher, the start-stop pusher, when you start, I don't know if you can hear that click. I'll stop it and I'll reset. I'll start again. It's very, very stiff. The stop feels pretty normal and the reset feels pretty normal. Now, this is not the only B01 / B09 / two-door, I forgot the reference, movement that I've manipulated, and all of them have this problem. So I know this is not like a production problem and not necessarily an issue. It's just the way that they've decided to implement the chronograph column wheel makes the pusher, when it comes to starting, very stiff. But personally, I'm not using the pusher very often, so it's not such a big deal. The other things about this watch, I think it's a very attractive looking watch. It has no date and has the seconds at 3 o'clock, the running seconds at 3 o'clock here, the 12-hour counter at 6 o'clock, and a 30-minute counter over here at 9 o'clock. And as someone with very small wrists, my wrists are only about 6.25, 6.5 inches in circumference, this 41 millimeter size actually wears pretty well. I would say that this is probably the biggest I could wear without much overhang. And I've been wearing it for a few days, and I really enjoy it immensely. Now, we do have to talk about price a little bit here. So this watch came in 3 different versions, all limited edition. The stainless steel, which is limited to 1,959 pieces, because 1959. This particular rose gold version, which was made in 159 examples, and a platinum version, which was made in only 59 examples. But since the prices are significantly different at about $9,500 US for the stainless steel, 24.7 for this rose gold version, and 45.7 for the platinum version, I highly doubt that they sold all that many, or they would have sold all that many gold and platinum ones had they produced it in an unlimited series. The stainless steel, however, which is very unusual for a Breitling, seems to be holding its value quite well on Chrono 24. In rose gold, they have gone down a little bit. I think they're about $17,000, $18,000 right now. I know it's a little bit taboo to talk about pricing, but I think it is worth mentioning that for less than the price of a stainless steel Rolex Daytona, much less, maybe 30% less, you could have a rose gold chronograph, which is, in my view, equally attractive and very competent. Now, it's a bit ironic. I also do own a Daytona in white gold and on the Oyster Flex bracelet, but I think if I had to pick, I actually would probably pick the Navitimer. Time will tell whether I wear this more often than my Daytona, which is not a watch that I wear a lot. Mainly because when it comes to the white gold Oyster Flex version, I actually don't find it all that comfortable. But this watch I find very comfortable. And a few details that I really like are the very vintage correct plexiglass crystal, as well as the photina, right? Because the numbers are a little bit yellowish. It's hard to capture on my phone camera, but normally I'm not a huge fan of this kind of fake patina that they tend to apply on the lume parts of the watch. But I think in this case it's done quite tastefully. It doesn't try to look like a tropical dial or anything like that. Another small detail is this bead of rice bezel here for the slide rule, which the chronograph the Navitimer is known for. Admittedly, I actually haven't learned how to use a slide rule yet. I will probably now be forced to learn, and fortunately, Breitling provides you with a practice slide rule for you to, I guess, learn how to use a slide rule on. Otherwise, the watch, this is not an unboxing, but comes in a pretty small box, which since I'm traveling, I really do appreciate. A travel case inside the box that I will never use as a travel case. It's, in my view, a little bit big and bulky, but it's well made in leather. I don't think the quality of leather is fantastic, but it's appropriate. And one thing that I do have to point out, though, is the outer carton of this box. I don't know if you can see it here. It says limited edition of 1,959 pieces, which is not true because I have the rose gold version, which was only made in 159 examples. I assume they couldn't be bothered to make 3 versions of this outer box. So I would imagine that if you bought the platinum version for $45,700, it would also have this incorrect numbering. Small detail, but I think, well, when it comes to collecting watches, all the details do matter. One more thing about the strap, other than being very stiff, I think the quality of the leather is pretty good. I'm no leather expert, but it looks like a top grain, not full grain leather, which I think is appropriate. I would have probably preferred some kind of velour leather to be a little bit softer and more comfortable, but I understand why they made this particular very vintage-inspired choice, and I think this will age quite well. The dimensions of this strap are also quite suitable. I think on the website it says it's 22 millimeters at the lug and 18 or 20 at the clasp, but I believe, based on what it says on this strap, that this is actually a 22 18 millimeter strap. But well, again, I'm traveling, so I don't have any way to measure it. Maybe I'll download one of those phone apps. And that is pretty much it. So I'll just show you guys the watch again. But keeping the chronograph running, so if I stop it and I reset, I'm very happy with this particular purchase. It was a little bit of a spontaneous choice, but Navitimer is a watch that I always wanted, and I really prefer this vintage-looking one over the modern one. Not that there's anything wrong with the modern 41 millimeter. That one has no numerals, but more or less the same layout, a little bit less text, and the same AOPA, or what is it, Aircraft Owner and Pilots Association logo, which Breitling seems to have been using, along with the tiny letters Breitling on top and Navitimer down here. The dial, as you can tell, is extremely crowded, but that is the style of the watch, and I think perfectly suitable. one question might be, well, for this price or maybe slightly more money, you could buy a real vintage 806 Navitimer from about 1959 or the 60s. But for myself, I'm buying watches to wear. And a modern watch with a modern movement, 70 hours of power reserve, 30 meters of water resistance, readily available parts, and in my view, better finishing and better manufacturing than vintage watches, makes the watch a lot more wearable for me. But I totally understand why people would buy vintage watches. I mean, I came with a kind of a pseudo vintage watch on my trip here and ended up buying this, my Rolex Explorer from 1995 with a single clasp bracelet. But this is a watch that I will talk about another time. So thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll answer them the best I can. And thank you, and have a nice day.